Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another rousing rendition of what we like to call here the Brethren Podcast. I'm your host, Mr. AJ Woodson of MMBBGW, and I've got my illustrious co-host with me always, Dr. Ajamu Loving, PhD CFP, and he can get you some TLC for your financeries. And Mr. Destrian Wells of D Wells Consulting. My gentlemen, how are you doing this fine afternoon? Because yet again, we are trying this midday format that we so graciously love.
Man, I'm doing great. Doing great, man. Yeah.
Welcome back, bro.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have been doing the work of brethren and much other across the world. So trying to make this thing international because it is what it is. It's a relevant message that we putting forth. So why not share it with people around the globe? But since we're doing this midday format, we aren't you doing the typical drinking thing. Doc, I think, has some coffee. Destrian has some a glass of Coca-Cola. Me myself, I have a small sample here of some very special brandy that I got from a vineyard in Cape Town, South Africa. So
that's all.
As we normally do. Look, I mean, that's all. That's all.
Yeah.
As we normally do, we still will do the toast to a great conversation, bread being dropped, and hopefully some people will be able to pick up some crumbs from it. Cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Well, all right. So, as usual, I have not told y'all what the topic is.
Of course.
And we were having a bit of a conversation pre-recording, and it helped me figure out what the actual working title would be. So today's topic of focus is going to be executive engagement, and just kind of delving into the proper ways to communicate at a high level with people. I know Destrian often uses that phrase when we're speaking and doing things like that. He's like, let's have a high level conversation. And it's kind of I don't want to say a trendy phrase, but it's being entered more into the lexicon and daily use of people, like high level. But we like to frame things in tiers of executive. So, we're going to talk about some executive engagement because there's some pertinent conversations happening offline and in other places where there is a certain decorum that you use in these conversations, but you also have to make sure that you stand true to yourself and you get your point across. And to quote someone from a fight DVD that I saw back in my youth, we ain't finna front for these peckerwoods. Let's keep it real. So just me saying the phrase executive engagement, Mr. Wells, what comes to your mind when you hear that phrase executive engagement?
Man, this is crazy. So I was having a conversation earlier this morning, actually, with my wife. We were talking about, like, basically how we miss each other in terms of communication. I think often, like, high-level conversations or higher frequency or higher vibration conversations, they happen naturally. And when you try to have an agenda, and when you try to force things or push a narrative, you can kind of decrease the value of that natural human interaction or engagement. And when you're simply having a discussion where the outcome or desired outcome is betterment, I think, those situations tend to play out a little bit better. So when I hear the term executive conversation, I don't even think about the workplace first. I think about being on the same page with the people around me that matter the most. That's my wife, my kids, people like you all, because those are the things that keep my life going. Those are the things, the ecosystem that I need in order to allow me to go to work and be successful. So I think executive level conversations actually start in the home. And it's important that we start them there because you're able to more appropriately communicate when you get to the workplace, because it's a way of life as opposed to, the code switching that we do. You was just saying about tap dancing and that type of thing, but really it's about finding your authentic voice. And that's the exclusivity of the executive nature of which I think conversations need to happen in a more authentic way. And as long as you're doing that, I think the frequency and the vibration is automatically magnified. So that's kind of how I look at it and how I would frame it or shape it from my perspective, at least on the outset.
Doc.
Yeah, I would say that, especially when I think about executive engagement, I think that definitely communication is a big part of that, making sure that um, the full understanding of what the outcome of not just the conversation, but what the goals are organizationally, individually. I think all of those things need to be at the forefront of your mind. I think you need to know the resources that will help you actually execute. And I think that's the operative word in this whole in this sentence is, when we're talking about executives, their job is not just to see and understand what the direction is likely to be, but from having those high level conversations and increasing understanding with the people who are around you, and the understanding of the resources that you have, now you can actually go out and engage in a more practically successful manner, I think, in at least directed manner. And so I think it's important to have both these conversations, but also understand that it's important to have conversations with an idea of how are we going to operationalize these things and get moving. And so a lot of the back and forth, I think, to DJ's point is you don't want to walk in with a whole bunch of preconceived notions about, hey, things have to go this way. I think we all have a pretty good idea in our mind when we're presented with a problem or an opportunity. Like we have our own sort of, hey, this is the way in which we should probably approach this. The importance of having that engagement, having that circle that you can talk to and having these conversations is so that you can find out more about both the opportunity, more about the resources, more about the attitudes of the people who are around you, so that you can actually start to conceive of what it is that you need to do to move towards whatever the goal is, right? And so these are the important things before you start actually acting. I've seen some of the biggest mistakes that executives and leaders make are around the idea of going off with the information they have and their own intuition. And certainly when you're talking about executives that are coming into a new organization, I think the impetus at first, many times people think, oh, okay, well, they're bringing me in, so I need to be here and be ready to make some changes, because if they wanted everything the same, they wouldn't have brought me in. And that's a valid point. But also, before you start swinging the bat, you need to know a little bit about how the pitcher tends to pitch, so that you can have an idea of what you can do to increase the odds of you connecting with the ball, getting the hit or a home run or whatever needs to happen at the end of the day. And so the overconfidence that people have because they've had prior experiences that are similar to the one that they might be faced with, those things can end up putting you in a place where you do something that's completely wrong, given the organization or individuals you're working with, right? So as an executive, when you're engaging, sure, it's about getting the job done. Sure, it's about, not sitting on your hands, but you have to give yourself the information necessary to make things happen and do it well. One of the best interviews I ever saw, or at least components of this interview, was for a dean of a college of business. And they asked him, hey, what changes do you plan to make? And he said, well, he identified some of the opportunities for the college that any university would have, and said, hey, you don't have a named school of business. There are donors out there, these types of things. But before I start talking about the direct actions that I'm going to do, let me talk to you about my 90-day process. He said the first 30 days, all I'm doing is observing. I'm meeting the people. I'm finding out where our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, right? That's called the SWOT analysis. When people say that, that's what they mean. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. From there, The next 30 days, from days 30 to 60, now we're starting to actively architect where it is that we might be able to go and seeking feedback on some of that architecture. So the engagement continues as you're going through that process. And then in that last 60 to 90 days, we're finalizing our actual plan and beginning to get ready to launch our activities on day 90. And what that showed me in an interview process, and then when somebody actually engages and operates that way, it shows, number one, respect for the people who are already on the ground doing the work, and the what it is that the institution's doing well or the group is doing well. And then it brings in that collaborative component of, hey, let's now start to think about ways that we can reimagine and improve, right? And then from there, we start to finalize those things and really draw down at some level of granularity the detail necessary to go about doing these things. And then now we can execute, right? I think that when you jump to the conclusion before going through some of these steps, it doesn't have to be a full 90-day process. You start to increase the odds that you can be off base, and in some cases, very far off base when you are operating with all of the facts that are there. And folks will let you fall on your face, especially if you come in as a haughty executive or think that you have all the answers when you don't.
And Doc, I think one of the things that you brought up that I would just highlight, when you say executive engagement, you didn't say executive argument. Like that, we're not walking into this room to just participate in a bunch of discourse. Engagement is about outcomes, and I think when you frame things in terms of we have the right people in a room, whether that's from a business perspective or a life perspective, you're talking to your spouse, you're focused on outcome. In a business setting, you're focused on outcome. So you have the people in a room that are going to equip you or inform your decision in terms of the outcome that we're collectively trying to get to. And I think that's where leadership being the language of communication comes into a great effect, right? And so again, executive engagement, not executive arguments. Like you're looking to explore and get to better outcomes. And I think, again, higher frequency or higher vibration conversations are about the fact that we know that you're in this room because your opinion lends value or it has some type of value to it. So as opposed to minimizing it, you want to elevate the other people in the room to engage with you and share the information in order to achieve the desired outcome. And I think that's the difference between executive level communication and when you're talking about discourse or conversation, right? And so I think, you pointed out some things that were, I think, great in terms of perspective and outlook, but ultimately outcomes are what you're looking at. And those people would not be in the room if you didn't deem them valuable or worthy to weigh in on the decision. And so you have to value, the input that they provide.
I think instead of using the word outcome, I would replace it with output, just for more tangibility, because it's, in terms of like what Doc was saying with like somebody coming in to run a process at a college, where you're thinking from a business point, it's like, okay, where's the output coming from of, obviously enrollment, bringing people in, where are the places that we can just like, okay, this process is too slow or this process isn't, updated or modernized, that kind of thing. But Doc also brought up a good point that I wanted you all to hone in on too. And DJ, you hinted on it. And when we're talking about executive engagement, it's key to note that we're not exactly talking about, being an executive or being in an executive room, but it also stands to be noted that both sides have to know how to do this, right? It takes two to tango at all times. And if, and even in more settings, it's more than two people doing this at the same time. So even if you're not an executive or a leader or in a leadership position, you still need to know how to communicate with people in that position, and vice versa. People in that position need to know how to communicate with people that aren't in that position. So in terms of executive engagement, we're just talking about the broader conversation of communication, whereas everybody has to know how to have authentic and truthful conversations with each other when it comes to any and every topic, but mainly focus here. We talking about life and business because that's what we do. But the question and the area that I want to push this conversation to now is in terms of practicing these skills and having the skill set, because for some people it comes naturally and it just has to be whittled and refined. But to some people it's something that has to be taught to them. And there are only certain aspects that you can, teach people. Like just for instance, there are public speaking classes, which there are people who are totally averted to that when they take that class and it brings them out of their shell a little bit, but that doesn't mean that they want to now go around the world doing public speeches. It helps them just, on a very basic level where now they can have basic conversations and engage with people better than they did before when they were totally averted to the idea of public speaking in whatever, way, shape or form that it came in. So just in terms of practicing the skill and staying good at it, if you are good at it, how would you all deem that practice? And, how do you practice those skills? I'll throw it to you, one of y'all first.
Yeah, no, let me just say that I think that being an executive is not something that's certainly not limited to your to what it is that you do for a living or your job title, I should say specifically. When you start talking, everybody ought to be an executive, the chief executive officer of their own life, right? And I think just the executive part maybe deserves a bit of focus because so many times in life we find ourselves responding to thing after thing and putting out fires in our own lives. And I think sometimes it's important to recognize that the fires that you experience in your own life aren't always just because of chance and bad things happening to you. Sometimes the fires that we experience in our lives are a function of us not being executives or executive-like in our actions, in our meaning, in our in what it is that we're actually doing, right? And so you let stuff happen to you, right? Your finances are a matter of, it's just what happens to be left in my pocket is what I'm going to be able to save or invest. Whether or not I'm going to be able to make my bills is whether or not the hourly numbers come in or these business deals just flow or I get lucky, right? Those types of things, rather than being on top of planning what it is that you want to accomplish and then going out and doing it. Have an idea of the resources, having an idea of the time, and having the idea of the goals, right? And as I've said before, a goal is not a goal until it has both a timeline and a dollar sign, right? And so when we start thinking about what it is that we actually want to do, everybody ought to be an executive and you ought to be engaged in your own life. Now, your ability to be powerful and influence things around you, yeah, to a certain extent, it's going to fall in line with the type of work you do or the job position that you have. But that executive skill set, that ability to acquire knowledge, that ability to act on that knowledge, and that ability to bring out output or outcomes that are consistent with improvement, those things are skill sets that will make you successful in whatever chosen direction that you happen to pick. You just have to pick one. And again, that's that's another part of being an executive and being engaged is recognizing at some point you have to make a decision. When we make those decisions, we want to make informed decisions, which again gets back to that communication, that finding out what all of the details are to the best degree that you can, and then looking at the people. Yeah, that's right. I said it. People, because people are more important than things. That's the most important element, right? Where you can have that resource of folks that can help you out through a thing and give you knowledge and support and all of that. Those things are extraordinarily important in business, but also in life. What can each person bring to the table and contribute? Now we can start to see how quickly we can progress towards what our goals are that we've collectively decided upon. But if you don't do those things and then bad things happen, it's not because you're unlucky. It's because you have not done the things that are necessary for you to be able to set a good direction and execute on it. Bad things happen to not just unsuccessful people, they happen to successful people too, all the time. The difference is the unsuccessful person just looks at it as, oh, okay, well, I have bad luck. My family is cursed. We can't get what it is that we want. Every time I try something, it just breaks up and it's not, it's not workable for me. The people who tend to be successful look at the elements of their failure, and they look at the elements of maybe prior successes or successes from others. And that's why having that circle of influence is extraordinarily important, so that you can start to see, okay, this fell down. How can we do something better? How can we improve this going forward? How can we go maybe in another direction and pivot to something that's going to likely be successful? But all of those things require an internal locus of control. And what I mean by that is you recognizing that the outcomes are going to be based on what it is that you input, and that quality of those is going to be, at least in part, based on the information that you receive from others. You can't lead in a vacuum. You can't lead in a position where nobody else has input, or at least not lead well. So the communication part of it is important, but also understanding that, as any individual, and I think one of the best things that I've seen fathers do, especially typically with young men, is talk to them about, no, this is your responsibility. When you start thinking about things as, oh, this is my responsibility, even from a little kid, now you recognize that the outcome is attached to the activities that you do. And you better get used to that in life, because the fact is, if you're going to be successful, you're going to have some rain, you're going to have some storms, you're going to have some fires, you're going to have some tough times. But the way in which you either succeed or fail is going to be based on what it is that you do in the face of those challenges, and what it is that you do when you are presented with opportunities. But again, you have to engage. So I don't know if you were conceiving of it that way, but that was sort of the way I was thinking of it, AJ.
No, you gonna paint your own picture. I'm gonna just, I'm supplying supplies, and I'm saying paint how you want. I'm not gonna tell you what I want, but I do want to point out, because you brought up a point, successful and unsuccessful people, and how we deem and how people look at situations and circumstances and outcomes. But one of the things with, it's like the elephant in the room that has to be acknowledged, is the fact that a lot of successful people have the ability or the privilege of taking those hits and things of that nature, which, could be, somewhat attributed to their, their engagements and their communication and things that happen to them along the way. And then you've got your unicorns that come from, somewhere different, but are able to, produce and become successful. But definitely got to make that distinction where there are some, a majority of people, I think, in my mind, that are successful are able to take those losses, and therefore it doesn't affect them the way that it is, where it's like, that first time failure hurts, and everybody doesn't get over it. But then once you get over it the first time, each time that it happens, not necessarily that you expect it, but if it does happen again, like you said, you can pull from your past experience and say, you know what, I've been down before. I can definitely, surely get through this. And I've been through worse before. I can surely get through this. But then also being able to say, some people just don't make it over that initial hump, where it's like failure hits that first time, and either they're going to have to sit down for a very long time in order to catch that lesson, or they have the resources to quickly get over it, financially, or they just, they sit down and they never recover from it, and they never try, or, go a totally different route because that thing didn't work for them.
I think it's tough when folks internalize failure and call them, basically end up thinking, I am a failure because I failed in this opportunity. That's not what I'm saying. I think that it's important to take personal responsibility, learn from the behaviors or actions that got you either a positive or negative result. But that doesn't mean that you're stuck and mired in whatever it is. And that's failure or success, because I think there are folks who have had success with things and they just assume, oh, well, I'm charmed. Everything that I do is going to be successful. And then they are dejected when when a failure happens, right? And I think that the best way to be is recognize, hey, what's likely to happen is going to be based on my actions and understanding of what I'm doing. If it happens to go well, which you always hope that it does, that doesn't mean that I'm just some, a person that's magically put in place in a way where they can't fail. It's, oh, okay, these actions led to positivity. Let's accentuate the positive and try to eliminate or minimize the negative. Good thing, wonderful thing to do. It doesn't remove the possibility of certain things not working out, whether it's a business, a marriage, any of these types of things. Stuff can always go sideways. The objective is to do the best that you can with what it is that you have, but also recognizing the collective abilities of others and how helpful they can be in that process too. And anytime you start forgetting those things or the people who can actually help you, you do that to your own potential detriment.
So DJ, yeah, I see you about to chime in, but real quick, I want to hit you with a spin, because a lot of this, not even a lot of this, all of this conversation so far has been under the guise of external dialogue. But I think the part that, we often, talk about is the internal dialogue when we talking with ourselves, and how important the executive engagement for our internal conversations, much like what Doc was just kind of alluding to, where it's like, if a failure does happen, you don't internalize that and deem yourself a failure. But that's part of that executive engagement, where that dialogue that you're having with yourself has come in, because you're not going to tell anybody else. It's not as if this fails and now you have to go on a tour saying, hey, everybody, I'm not a failure because this happened. You got to really talk to yourself and tell that. So that's the part that I'm coming to you with to put that spin on it. But, whatever point you was about to make, go ahead and make it. But I definitely want to hit you with that too, of, in the framework of internal dialogue and executive engagement from that aspect.
It's critical. I mean, the first point of contention is typically with yourself. The first person you have to convince is yourself, right? Like, there has to be an internal belief that these things can happen. And let's be honest about this: success favors the prepared. Like, when Doc talks about things happening, yeah, what can happen will happen, but your success is pretty much predicated on your readiness and your preparedness. Are you prepared for things not to go right, and you have the mental fortitude to get through it? Now, if you don't personally have that, hopefully your team around you has it. But going back to this notion of the executive mindset, that means the buck stops with you. You are the person making this decision, and therefore you have to be the one that puts the mission and the vision out for everyone else to follow it. They have to get on board with that. And if you're not sold on it yourself, nobody else is going to follow that. You show me a confused person, I'll show you somebody that does nothing. You show me somebody with conviction, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're going to take action. Those people are action oriented. So you want to be a person that's able to not only move others into action, but you have to be able to have the conviction behind your decisions that allow you to be action oriented for yourself, and to be that self-starter, to be the leader, to be the person that is willing to be wrong. In order to lead, you have to be willing to be wrong, right? So you have to have that ilk or that skin that allows people to come to you and say, yeah, Stream, you could have been better today. Doc, you could have been better today. My question is going to be, how so? And then you go back to the drawing board and you're able to do that. That's what executives do. That's what people in leadership capacities do. And I think Doc made a great point earlier about being your own chief executive officer. You don't need anybody else to give you these titles. You need to understand that every day there are decisions that are being made by you on your behalf for people that will never meet you. And if you understand the value and the responsibility that you have from their perspective, I think you take your decision making matrix a lot more serious and a lot different. So when you think about where it starts from, AJ, then that internal clock, that internal desire, that fire that should be burning, you want to make sure that's well lit, because you're not going to always have somebody to light that for you. You're not going to always be able to fully be able to see the direction that you should go, but you should have enough, of that, what do you call it, that it factor within you to be willing to be the one to make the decision, to be the one willing to take that strategic risk. You talked a little bit about that, about having the ability to make it. I think a lot of that is mental as well, where instead of beating each other up about the mistakes that we make, we collectively learn from them and we give people some grace to get it wrong enough times to finally get it right. Right. And if we look at it as lessons instead of losses, those things end up adding up to be the sum of the experience that you need to be a great executive, to be a great leader, to be a great decision maker, a thought leader. All these things come from, quite frankly, mistakes. No one has, no one who's ever gotten it all right can be a great teacher. No one who's gotten it all right is going to be able to empathize or sympathize with folks and be able to bring them along on the journey. So it's going to take some scarring, some tears, some blood, some sacrifice in order to put yourself or your family or others in a situation where there's a collective benefit. Someone has to shoulder the load for that. And I think that the people that do, they're a special breed, but it all starts with a mindset that you make your mind up that you are willing to be the person that's going to sacrifice. You're going to be the person that's willing to get it wrong. And all the negative things that are associated with that, we often don't see. We just celebrate the end result, which is, hey, we got the ball across the finish line. But we need to start making sure we understand that there's a price to be paid as relates to being a leader or being a person that is in the position to make these types of decisions. And we also need to help people get through that day-to-day interaction that often starts with inside of themselves. And there's a lot of self-doubt that happens there. So the encouragement that's needed, the inspiration that's needed, they have to draw that from somewhere. And certainly the people that you correlate around you are a breeding ground for what your output or your outcomes are going to be. So I think that was an excellent question, dude.
Yeah, and I think what it also you brought up was it brings back in the risk reward factor of things, where it's but also that frame of mind where you have to understand that a lot of the reward you may not physically or actually reap. It has to be a future mindset thing where it's like, what is, this struggle, which is the risk, this failure, which is the risk, is going to far out, it's going to dwindle in comparison to the reward that this is going to reap. Even just from the basic standpoint of, if I fail at this, I can tell mine what doesn't work, what does work. And now we can, I can either continue to work on this until I perfect it and then hand them a perfected thing, or I can hand them a project that's halfway done and they can finish it themselves and not have to go through the losses and the lessons. It's already written down for them in a book.
Yeah.
The biggest thing with that, I'm going to jump real quick, Doc, and I'll give it to you. The biggest thing with that is you don't want to constantly be in a situation where you can't lend your experience to other people. Like, forget expertise. Sometimes you just need the other person's experience so that you don't have to go through what they went through to get to the outcome, right? Experience is a really expensive teacher. And if I can avoid the experiences of it or going through something traumatic, I don't need you to be an expert. I just need you to help me understand, hey, man, you probably don't want to do this way because I've already done that. And I think there should not be a monopoly on good information. And what I would encourage folks to do is to share more information with more people so that, again, we can learn, grow, and execute at a more rapid rate. But over to you, Doc.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more about progress than perfection. And I think sometimes, especially when we start to look at the outcomes of things, be like, oh man, that worked out. This company is in a position where it's having an IPO, and all of the people who worked at the company are rich. And then you wonder sometimes, hey, they made it, they're rich. Why are folks leaving the company? Because they're tired. That's why. Because it was a far from perfect process. When you get to that sort of finish line, a whole lot has happened. If you watch an Olympic level quarter miler run, you would think that person has never cramped in their life. They're winning a gold medal and they glide smooth across the track. And you watching them and you thinking, man, this is a superhuman person. What you haven't seen is all of those training runs that they went on when they were throwing up on the side of the track, all the cramps they got, all of the times when they were laying on that trainer's table and they were getting their hamstring massaged out, all the times when they're in that cold tub trying to get their life together, when they're wondering, man, am I good enough to be a world champion level sprinter? Am I is this worth it? Can I do it? Like those doubts, those difficulties, all of those things are there. But when you watch them, they look smooth as butter, and then they're standing on top of a podium, and you say to yourself, "Wow, what must life be like for a person like that to be able to run like the wind and stand on top of podiums?" And they are remembering what must like have been like. I've thrown up in countless garbage cans, had countless cramps, ran till I felt like my toes were gonna fall off and my fingers were shaking and my heart was beating so hard I thought it was gonna fly out my chest, so that I can be in a position to have this one beautiful, flawless, less than a minute run that makes everybody think that I'm some god. But if you ask them, and you look at their training regimens and you watch all of that, all of what's happened, the coach knows, the athlete knows, everybody who's engaged in that sport, when you really think about it, oh, they know, man, it's about progress. It's about that inch. It's about getting one tick of a second faster, getting your movements one little bit more efficient so that you can experience the success that is consistent with your abilities. But they recognize those abilities aren't something that's just something that was just already out there. No, that's an expanding frontier based on what it is that you put into it, right? The blood, the sweat, the tears, the cramping, the workouts that you have to do when you don't feel like it. All of these are elements of getting ahead. If it was easy, everybody would have it already. That's just how it is. If it was easy to do, everybody would have done it. For you to do what it is that you are called to do, sure, you are uniquely talented to do what is your calling. But that doesn't mean that it's going to happen without difficulty, and certainly not without some work, some elbow grease, some sweat, some nights where you're wondering whether or not I can. And that's to you guys' point about, hey, having those people around you that can speak life into and tell you, hey, you got this, you can do this. Accountability partners who can tell you, hey, man, have you looked at this yet? Have you done these things? People in your life with ideas who are saying, oh, you're doing this. Hey, have you looked at this group? There's this conference that's going on that's doing that. Helping you expand your network, increase your your own vistas, right? Broaden those vistas so you can see the opportunities around you. And you have to have the mindset that says, hey, I am a person that's a vessel, but I'm not a vessel with boundaries. I can take in information from all of these places. I can learn new things, and I can apply those things to things I already want to accomplish. Also, I can take in that information and maybe refine what it is that I want to accomplish once I see what's possible in other ways and where resources might be available. You have to be willing to examine that whole risk rewards cost benefit analysis that you're talking about, AJ. You have to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to take a risk. In that If poem by Rudyard Kipling, he says, hey, if I can make one heat of all my winnings and risk it on one turn, pitch and toss, lose and start again at my beginnings and never breathe a word about my loss. That is some serious success oriented. I see it, I want it. I'm willing to do what it takes to get it. And if it doesn't happen, boom, I'm not going to just give up. I'm going to start again at my beginnings. And I'm not going to dwell in and live in my failure. I'm willing to push and feel the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run this time. Now, I don't want you running headlong into brick walls repeatedly. This is where it's important to listen. And I think for men, a lot of times we have difficulty with that. And certainly in the household, sometimes we do, because we feel like we are called on to be leaders in our homes, and we most certainly are. But a good leader takes in information and listens to the people who are also a part of that household, because success ain't going to feel like success, certainly if you're a married man, unless she can feel successful too. Right. So y'all need to both be in a position where your input counts. You can understand that this is a united vision that we have. And now we can start to execute in our own ways to make this collective joint vision work. But you have to be willing. Exactly.
And that may fare too well in the world as we know it.
Man, look, man, the dictator, people feel like it's good.
You got to walk with kings and not lose the common touch. See, I know the poem too now.
Yeah, now I know you do. But when those shoes whipping at you, or when the overthrow or the coup happens because you've operated as a dictator, and you're like, wait, why is she leaving? Where is it? Well, I thought everything was cool.
Why is my team abandoning me?
Right. You front ran. You did what you wanted to do. And you didn't take information in. Sometimes it leads to failure. Sometimes it leads to hollow success. But oftentimes what happens when you're running alone and not making sure that you actually have your team with you and behind you is you do end up by yourself.
But that's part of the executive engagement in itself, right? Where it's like everybody has to know how to communicate from both sides. But then, and that part of that communication is the intake of somebody else's output. And then vice versa, where it's like, I have to be able to fluently speak to you. You have to be able to fluently understand me, and vice versa. Yeah. Where it's like, traveling, one of the things, and this is just, one example that comes to mind is we were in an Uber, and our Uber driver spoke English, but obviously English isn't his first language. He was from Uganda. And we were asking him where could we get some good jollof rice, and just based on maybe our accent or just his hearing of what we said, he thought we said giraffe. He was like, "No, we don't eat that here," and we was like, "Y'all don't eat jollof?" He was like, "No, we don't eat giraffe." We was like, "No, not giraffe, jollof," and he was like, "Oh," and then but it was the difference of language
moment.
Yeah, it was the difference of language where it's like just a visual example of, the engagement was not there, and it was no fault of anybody else's. It was just, verbiage used or whatever. Because he basically explained, he was like, "Oh, you got to ask, we ask about," and it was a word that he used, like basically saying, where do you get food that you eat with your hands, like typical African food or whatever. But we named a dish where it's like they don't necessarily just say the dish. That may be, something that they Americanized to bring it over, like, we call it jollof here, but at home we call it, something totally different or whatnot. But just, that brings up that whereas you have to have both sides being able to fluently understand and communicate with each other to be able to get that across. Like you said, get to that point where it's like, okay, it feels like a dictatorship because nobody ever expressed to the dictator that they felt like they were in a dictatorship. You know, it could be a little bit of delusion, a little bit of grandeur, where it's like they never knew that was going on because the fluidity of conversation wasn't flowing. And it could be some things where there were barriers in place and things of that nature, but that just speaks to the importance of being able for both sides to understand. And part of that engagement is understanding where you fall in that process. Whereas people, are going to have to understand, okay, you know what? I don't have a desire to be a leader. I don't want to be a leader, but I need to know how to communicate with a leader because I definitely don't want to be in a dictatorship. And then vice versa, where the leader has to be said, I'm a leader, but I also have to know how to communicate and receive from people that are under my guidance, but I also don't want to be a dictator. And that conversation, and that's the level of executive engagement that I'm talking about, where I'm glad that I can give you all such a seemingly simple topic and you all can make it a profound conversation and a profound topic with all kind of anecdotes and informational, insight into what it is, because it can seem very simple, like executive engagement, and you can make it very, very straightforward, like, okay, we're talking to CEOs, but it's not. It's it's much more nuanced, and then all of the different ways that we've been able to kind of point out different aspects and outcomes and situations where this applies. But in how we normally do it, now I come to y'all and ask for these tangible things that we do. We've kind of pointed out a few. DJ mentioned earlier, having an authentic voice, which ultimately led to the piece where we deemed where there is an internal dialogue in terms of executive engagement. You got to talk to yourself and be true to yourself. So having that authentic voice starts with being authentic with yourself. And I feed y'all the quote of power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner, which we get from the great Huey P. Newton. But now is the time for y'all to tell people what are the tangible things to do where they can either start on their journey of getting better at executive engagement, no matter what side they fall on, finding out what side they come on, because maybe they may not know it, and practicing and deliberately putting themselves in place in situations and scenarios where they're able to hone and craft the skill to be able to have these fluid conversations where nothing really is lost. Everything is there and everything is authentic. I'll throw it to you, DJ, first, and then we'll finish with Doc.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, man, you need to go ahead and get comfortable failing. Let's get comfortable failing. You do not have to get it right every time. And I think you need to be willing to learn and grow from those failures. Ultimately, that's what's going to drive your success. And I think that so many times we're concerned about getting it right that we don't take the chance, right? So I need us to take the chance. Number one, trust yourself enough to take the chance. Trust the people around you to help pick you up when you inevitably fail. And also be willing to stay the course in order to get to the other side of that. And you can enjoy the success because, again, that experience, you're going to be able to bring other people along with you. You're going to be able to go much further, much faster together than you're going to be able to go alone. And those are the real tangible things that I see in terms of executive engagement. It's the willingness to do just that, engage and get out of your own way, get out of your head, get out of your own way, and actually be okay with some of the failures that come as a part of the process and journey to success. So whatever I can do, whatever brethren can do to help advance those efforts, if you have ideas around, something you want to get off the couch and start doing, be okay with failing. And let's take this trip, let's take this journey together, and let's get these things done, man. So executive engagement starts with first the ability to make a decision for yourself that you want to be a part of the game. So get in the game and really start taking ownership of your choices, your decision making. You're going to be better for it, and the people that like, love, and care about you will too.
Yeah. So it's interesting, and I think failure is an interesting point to sort of focus on, right? Because it's not just progress versus perfection. I think that's a takeaway. Yeah, you need to be progress minded towards those goals, not thinking that things are going to operate in perfection, and then recognize and have a third P, and that's perspective, right? And so I think sometimes we lack tenacity because we want each thing to fall down like a domino in the order that we planned it. And that's when we say, okay, yeah, things are progressing the way that I want to. And, you operate in a place where it all looks perfect. And I can tell you that any long process is going to come fraught with some levels of failure. So, my my chosen martial art, which I've loved for a long time and been engaged in since 1999, is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I had the goal when I started of becoming a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and I have become that, right? But it is not a thing that I have done perfectly. There have been gaps when I wasn't attending because I couldn't attend as much because my schedule wouldn't allow me to, but also throughout the process, failure is built into it. You're going to get submitted. People are going to be better than you. They're going to tap you out. That's when you have to yield, not quit, yield, because the pressure on a limb or the pressure on your arteries becomes too much that you might end up in a position where you're unconscious, right? Those are moments of yielding, right? But they're not moments of quitting. And I think the perspective comes in mind. It's like, oh, okay, I learned not to make that particular movement, not to say I'm going to get out of the game and quit completely. And I think so many times people are looking for things to flow perfectly because, you watch HGTV or something like that. They start out with a house that looks like trash. And then by the end of a 30-minute episode, it's all completely finished. Everything's beautiful. And you're touring the home and folks are crying and everybody looks at the success. They look at the outcome. That's not a typical home remodeling or improvement experience, right? There are going to be some times in which things don't work out the way you thought they would. You have to have there's a few pieces of ceramic tile that are broken on the side of the house because those cuts that you made didn't work out the way that you thought they would. Like all of these things that you don't see in that clean episode are a part of the overall progress from where they were to where they're going. And so recognize that there are going to be obstacles. There are going to be times that things don't work out the way that you thought or hoped that they would. But the same way you would in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, you tap, you readjust, and you try not to make the same mistake over and the same. A same thing could fall out, and next thing you know, you're in a position where you're also getting choked, or getting a limb stretched out that you hoped wouldn't happen. But guess what? That's part of the game. That's part of the progression. That's part of recognizing that this is not something that happens without unpleasant moments. And so, I think sometimes people think of failure as something that is just, hey, it's all encompassing. But there's so many people, certainly high achievers, who look at, oh, I'm supposed to get a 100 on each and every thing. I'm supposed to be able to knock it out each and every time. And you recognize over time that it's usually not like that. You're going to have great days. You're going to have off days. You're going to have some strategies that work better than others. You're going to have people in your life who can be more or less productive as folks you're leading at different times. And you have to recognize that none of those things mean that the goal is something that can't be accomplished. You need to have that perspective that, okay, this thing didn't happen. Let's start marking our progress towards where the goal is, despite this setback. Anytime a sea captain sets out to sea, as soon as that boat becomes undocked, they are immediately off course. Immediately off course, because water does what it does, and the boat is floating in water. And what's the captain's job? The captain's job is to right the ship and continuously right the ship throughout the entire journey so that the course that they plan on taking is the one that they're actually on. But it's not something that's a straight line that happens without some effort, without any level of deviation. No, we got to right the ship and go this way. We keep moving. There are going to be storms. There are going to be high wind days, and you have to adjust to all of these elements that are going to impact the journey that you take. You can't quit. You can't take your ball and go home. You can't just sit there and freeze. You have to recognize where it is that you're trying to go, right the ship, and continue your journey.
As usual, I thank you all for embarking on this journey with me. It's been a fun one, as always. With this, like I said, with this simple topic, you all have made it a very profound conversation on executive engagement. And the only thing that I think that I can truly say that everybody needs to definitely take away, besides everything that was said, is keep in mind to have your authentic voice, but also understanding the authentic value of your voice. And that starts with a high level conversation with yourself. Deshaun mentioned, having the confidence outside, but you need to have the inner confidence to know that, okay, it's okay to be the position that I am, or whatever you choose to be. But you also need to be confident in communicating your efforts and your intentions with others. And at the head of that list is obviously yourself. Failure is not finite. So don't ever think that it is. And in the illustrious words of Dr. Loving, the new thing is going to be timelines and dollar signs. I think that's going to be at the top of my list over people over things. It's always going to be people over things. It always will be. But timelines and dollar signs is just something that I feel like should be on the tag of a Corvette 1998 edition or something like that. Timelines and dollar signs is a new mantra and motto of this year. We'll add that to the list of just things that we're all about. We're all about timelines and dollar signs. A goal is nothing without a timeline and a dollar sign. We didn't say and or. You need both. So with that, we will leave you with this conversation. Hopefully something came from it. If it did, please make sure that you're following us on all our social media at Brethren Podcast. That's bread spelled BREADREN, because we always talking about our bread and we always get into that bread. Timelines and dollar signs, baby. Follow Dr. Ajamu Loving at Dr. Ajamu Loving on all social media. Ajamu Loving on Money and You on Facebook. DrAjamuLoving.com. Mr. Deshaun Wills, you can find him at Empower, Engage, Execute on all social media platforms. DWillsConsulting.com. You can find me at mmbbgw.com, 248. The numbers MMBB on Facebook and Instagram. We love y'all. There's nothing you can do about it. And please tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend that the Brethren Podcast is on. Come get your crumbs. We love you and we out.